The Golden Dragon restaurant buzzed with the gentle murmur of evening diners, the soft clink of chopsticks against porcelain bowls creating a symphony of contentment. Steam rose from countless dishes, carrying the rich aromas of ginger, soy sauce, and star anise through the warm, amber-lit space. Red lanterns swayed gently overhead, casting dancing shadows on the walls, adorned with golden dragons that seemed to move in the flickering light. Jackie Chan sat quietly in a corner booth, his back to the wall out of habit, sharing a simple meal with three longtime friends from the film industry. At 33, he was already becoming a household name, but tonight he just wanted to be Chan Kong-sang, a regular guy enjoying good food and better company. He wore a simple white t-shirt and jeans, nothing that would draw attention, though his calloused hands and the way he held his chopsticks with precise economical movements hinted at something more than ordinary. "You remember that stunt in Project A?" his friend Ming was saying, gesturing enthusiastically with a dumpling. "When you fell from the clock tower? I still can't believe you survived that." Jackie chuckled, taking a sip of his jasmine tea. "Surviving isn't the hard part," he said in Cantonese, his voice warm with humor. "The hard part is making it look good while you're falling." His friends laughed, but their conversation was suddenly interrupted by the sharp sound of the front door slamming open with such force that the small bell above it rang frantically before falling silent. 5 men in dark clothes and ski masks burst through the entrance, their heavy boots echoing against the restaurant's tile floor like gunshots. The transformation in the restaurant was immediate and complete. Conversations died mid-sentence. Chopsticks froze halfway to mouths. Even the kitchen sound seemed to pause as if the building itself was holding its breath. The lead intruder, a tall man with broad shoulders, brandished a long kitchen knife that gleamed under the lantern light, while his companions spread out with practiced efficiency, blocking the exits and menacing the terrified diners with their own weapons. "Nobody move!" the leader shouted in heavily accented Cantonese, his voice carrying the hard edge of someone used to being obeyed. "Empty your wallets, your jewelry, everything valuable on the tables. Now!" An elderly woman near the window began to whimper softly. A young couple at a nearby table clutched each other's hands so tightly their knuckles went white. The restaurant owner, Mr. Chen, emerged from behind the counter with his hands raised, his face pale as morning mist. Jackie's friends instinctively began to reach for their wallets, but Jackie himself remained perfectly still, his teacup halfway to his lips, steam still rising from the surface. His eyes, however, were moving, cataloging, calculating, measuring distances and angles with the same precision a chess master might study a board. The lead robber's gaze swept across the restaurant and stopped when it reached Jackie's table. For a moment, recognition flickered in his eyes behind the mask. Then a cruel smile spread across his visible features. "Well, well," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the now silent restaurant. "Look what we have here, the famous Jackie Chan." He began walking slowly toward the corner booth, his knife pointed directly at Jackie's chest. "Boys, we've hit the jackpot tonight. Not only are we going to get rich, but we're going to teach this pretty boy movie star what real fighting looks like." The other robbers chuckled darkly, closing in from different angles, their confidence growing with each step. They had done this before. That much was clear from their coordination, their timing, the way they moved to cut off every possible escape route. What they hadn't done before was corner someone like Jackie Chan in a restaurant full of improvised weapons and unlimited creative possibilities. Jackie slowly, deliberately, set down his teacup. The tiny sound it made touching the saucer seemed impossibly loud in the absolute silence. He looked up at the approaching men with an expression that was neither afraid nor angry, just curious, as if they were presenting him with an interesting puzzle to solve. "Gentlemen," Jackie said softly in perfect English, his voice carrying just a hint of amusement, "I think you might have made a small mistake." The lead robber stopped just 3 feet away, close enough that Jackie could see the sweat beading on his forehead above the mask. "The only mistake," the man snarled, raising his knife higher, "is that you decided to eat dinner tonight instead of staying home where movie stars belong." What happened next would be talked about in Hong Kong for decades to come. Time seemed to slow as Jackie's body coiled like a spring. In one fluid motion, he swept his left arm across the table, sending his teacup flying in a perfect arc toward the lead robber's face. But this wasn't just a distraction. It was the opening move in a symphony of controlled chaos that would unfold in exactly 97 seconds. As the robber instinctively ducked to avoid the hot tea, Jackie's right hand had already grasped his chopsticks, With a flick of his wrist that seemed impossibly casual, he sent one chopstick spinning through the air like a miniature spear. It struck the pressure point on the second robber's wrist with surgical precision, causing him to drop his knife with a cry of surprise and sudden numbness. But Jackie was already moving. He vaulted over the table with the grace of a gymnast, his feet landing on the chair that his friend Ming had just vacated. The bamboo chair became his launching pad as he sprang forward, catching the fallen knife mid-air with his left hand, while simultaneously using his right to grab a ceramic soup bowl from a nearby table. The third robber, seeing his partner disarmed, lunged forward with his own blade. Jackie spun to his left, the knife missing him by inches, and in the same rotation he brought the soup bowl down on the man's extended arm. The sound was sharp and final, not the crack of breaking bone, but the hollow thunk of a perfectly placed pressure point strike that sent the weapon clattering across the floor. "What the?" the lead robber started to say, but Jackie was already behind him. Using a technique he'd perfected during years of stunt work, Jackie grabbed the red tablecloth from a nearby table with both hands and, with a movement that looked almost like a magic trick, wrapped it around the leader's knife hand while simultaneously pulling him off balance. The man spun like a top, his weapon flying harmlessly into the air, where Jackie caught it with the casual ease of someone plucking an apple from a tree. The fourth robber, panic rising in his throat, charged from Jackie's blind spot, or what should have been his blind spot. But Jackie had positioned himself perfectly beside a large decorative mirror, and he saw the attack coming before the robber had even decided to make it. Without turning around, Jackie kicked backward with his right foot, connecting with a chair that slid across the floor with perfect timing and precision. The robber tripped spectacularly, his momentum carrying him into a table full of soup bowls that created a percussion symphony as they clattered to the floor. The fifth robber, the smartest of the group, decided that retreat was the better part of valor and bolted for the door. He made it exactly 4 steps before Jackie, moving with the fluid grace of water flowing downhill, intercepted him using nothing but a pair of bamboo serving trays as shields and weapons. One tray swept the man's legs while the other tapped him gently but precisely on a nerve cluster at the base of his neck. The robber simply sat down on the floor, not unconscious but completely unable to muster the will to move. Through all of this whirlwind of calculated motion and improvised combat, Jackie never raised his voice, never showed anger, never used more force than absolutely necessary. His movements were like a dance choreographed by someone who understood that violence should be efficient, precise, and ultimately merciful. When the last robber had been neutralized, Jackie stood in the center of the restaurant, not even breathing hard. Around him, 5 grown men sat or lay in various states of confusion and defeat, their weapons scattered across the floor like abandoned toys. Not one of them was seriously hurt. They would wake up tomorrow with nothing worse than bruises and wounded pride. The silence that followed was profound and complete. 37 people, diners, staff, even the cook who had emerged from the kitchen to watch, stared at Jackie with expressions that ranged from awe to disbelief to something approaching religious reverence. Jackie looked around at the mess of overturned chairs, scattered dishes, and defeated robbers. He scratched his head in a gesture that was endearingly boyish, then walked over to where his teacup had landed, miraculously unbroken, near the front door. "Sorry about the mess, Mr. Chen," he called to the restaurant owner in Cantonese, his voice carrying genuine concern. "I'll pay for any damages." Mr. Chen, still standing behind his counter with his mouth hanging open, could only nod mutely. Jackie began collecting the scattered chopsticks and bowls, stacking them neatly on the nearest table. As he worked, he started to whistle, a simple, cheerful melody that his mother used to hum while she cooked. The sound was so incongruous, so perfectly normal after what everyone had just witnessed, that it seemed to break the spell that had frozen the entire restaurant. One by one, the other diners began to move again, to breathe again, to remember how to blink. The sound Jackie made as he straightened the last overturned chair was one they would indeed never forget. Not a battle cry or a shout of triumph, but the gentle scraping of bamboo legs against tile as he carefully positioned the furniture back where it belonged. It was the sound of someone who understood that real strength lies not in destruction, but in the ability to restore order from chaos. By the time the police arrived, called by a neighbor who had seen the masked men enter, the 5 would-be robbers were sitting in a neat line by the door, their weapons collected in a small pile, looking less like dangerous criminals and more like confused students waiting outside the principal's office. They offered no resistance when the officers cuffed them, perhaps because they were still trying to process what had happened to them. Detective Wong, a veteran of Hong Kong's police force, who had seen everything from triad wars to international smuggling operations, listened to the witnesses' accounts with growing amazement. 37 people told essentially the same story, a story so incredible that he would have dismissed it as mass hysteria if not for the physical evidence scattered around the restaurant. "Mr. Chan," Detective Wong said, approaching Jackie, who was now helping Mr. Chen sweep up the broken pieces of one unfortunate soup bowl. "The witnesses say this entire incident lasted less than 2 minutes. Jackie paused in his sweeping and smiled with genuine humility. "Well, Detective, when you're hungry and your dinner gets interrupted, you learn to work quickly." The detective chuckled despite himself. "And you used what, exactly, as weapons?" "Nothing was a weapon," Jackie replied, returning to his sweeping. "Chopsticks are for eating, bowls are for soup, chairs are for sitting. I just borrowed them for a moment." As the night wore on and the police finished their report, something beautiful began to happen in the Golden Dragon restaurant. Instead of the traumatic aftermath one might expect, the atmosphere transformed into something approaching a celebration. Mr. Chen refused to let Jackie pay for damages. "What damages?" he kept insisting, though clearly several items had been broken, and other diners began approaching Jackie's table, not for autographs or photos, but to simply say thank you. Mrs. Liu, the elderly woman who had been crying during the robbery, brought Jackie a fresh cup of tea with hands that no longer trembled. "You made me feel safe," she said simply, and Jackie understood that she meant not just tonight, but in a larger sense, safe in a world where good people look out for each other. A young father whose family had been dining at the next table bowed formally and said, "My daughter asked me if you were a superhero. I told her no. You were something better. You were a good man who knew what to do." As the evening wound down and the last police officer left, Jackie finally returned to his now cold dinner. His friends, who had watched the entire incident with the same amazement as everyone else, sat quietly as he resumed eating as if nothing had happened. "Jackie," his friend Ming finally said, "how did you know exactly what to do? It was like you had rehearsed it." Jackie considered this question while chewing thoughtfully on a piece of sweet and sour pork. "You know how they say practice makes perfect?" he said. "I think it's more accurate to say that practice makes you ready. I've been practicing martial arts since I was a child, not because I wanted to fight, but because I wanted to understand movement, balance, timing. Tonight wasn't about fighting. It was about solving a problem using everything I've learned about how the world works." He gestured around the restaurant with his chopsticks. "Every object here has weight, balance, purpose. Every person has reactions, expectations, fears. When you understand these things deeply enough, solutions appear naturally. The robbers saw weapons and victims. I saw tools and opportunities to restore harmony." As they left the restaurant that night, Mr. Chen pressed a small red envelope into Jackie's hand, a traditional gesture of gratitude. Inside was not money, but a handwritten note in beautiful calligraphy. "Tonight you reminded us that true martial arts is not about conquering others, but about protecting the peace that allows ordinary people to enjoy ordinary happiness." Walking through the neon-lit streets of Hong Kong, Jackie reflected on the evening's events. In his films, the action was choreographed, the outcomes predetermined, the stunts performed for cameras and audiences. Tonight had been different, real, spontaneous, consequential. Yet the principles remained the same. Use your skills in service of others, solve problems with creativity rather than force, and remember that the greatest victories are the ones that leave everyone better than they were before. The sound they would never forget wasn't the crash of breaking dishes or the thud of bodies hitting the floor. It was the gentle scraping of a chair being set right, the quiet whistle of someone who understands that the most profound strength often speaks in whispers, and the soft certainty that in a world full of chaos, there are still people who will stand up to restore balance, not with anger or violence, but with skill, compassion, and an unshakable belief that goodness, properly applied, can overcome any darkness,